The deer standing at the edge of your yard may have been here years ago. Not yesterday. Not last season. Years ago. You see a deer and assume it is passing through. Moving on. Forgetting places as quickly as it leaves them behind. But what if that isn't true? What if the doe pausing beside your fence is not looking at your yard for the first time? What if she is recognizing it? The old apple tree. The narrow path behind the shed. The corner where snow melts first every spring. Researchers studying deer behavior have found that deer remember landscapes with remarkable detail. But landscapes are not the same thing as places. And places are not the same thing as memories. Because some deer return to yards they left long ago. Not by accident. As if something about that place still exists inside them. You would never know. That is the entire point. And by the end of this video, you may never look at a deer standing quietly in your yard the same way again. Welcome back to Hidden Backyard Wildlife, the channel where we sit with the small wild lives that share our yards and try to understand what they understand about the world. If you are new here, make sure you subscribe before this video is over, because what you are about to learn is going to permanently change the way you look at deer in your yard. Stay with me from beginning to end because behavior number 6 is the one that researchers did not believe until they documented it themselves. And the final one, number 8, is the one I think will stay with you the longest. Most people assume deer live only in the present. But deer often carry maps of safety inside their minds. A doe that once found shelter in your yard during a storm may remember that location long after she has moved elsewhere. Researchers studying deer movement have found that deer repeatedly return to familiar locations they associate with security. If you have ever noticed a deer appearing in exactly the same corner of your property year after year, there may be a reason. Your yard might exist in her memory as a place where nothing bad happened. In the small ways available to it, a deer remembers safety. And sometimes memory begins there. You might think a deer forgets a place once it changes. But often the opposite happens. A fence appears. A tree falls. A garden disappears. Yet the deer still walks the old route. Scientists documenting deer behavior have observed animals following pathways that no longer make practical sense. They are moving through a remembered version of the world. If you have ever wondered why a deer squeezes through a strange gap or pauses in an empty patch of grass, it may be because she remembers what used to be there. She has been keeping track, even when the landscape has not. And that is a surprisingly familiar kind of nostalgia. You may think deer simply respond to weather. But many seem to return to places according to old seasonal memories. The first spring shoots. The shaded summer corner. The winter feeding route. Researchers studying migration and local movement have found that deer often revisit the same seasonal locations over and over. Not because they are trapped by instinct alone. Because experience matters. The next time you see a deer appear almost on schedule each year, consider what that means. She remembers when the world felt a certain way in that place. And memory can become a calendar. Most people imagine every deer learning the world from scratch. That is not what happens. A mother deer quietly introduces her fawn to places she already knows. Safe crossings. Hidden resting spots. Reliable food sources. Scientists documenting family behavior have observed that young deer often inherit movement patterns from their mothers. If you have ever noticed generations of deer appearing in the same area, there may be more than coincidence involved. A memory can outlive the animal that first formed it. In a real sense, your yard may be part of a family story. One being told without words. You probably think memory belongs to one deer at a time. But memory can spread. One animal discovers a safe route. Another follows. Then another. Researchers studying deer populations have found that information can move through groups over time. If you have ever wondered why several deer seem to use exactly the same path through a neighborhood, this may be why. Knowledge travels in the small ways available to it. A route becomes tradition. A tradition becomes something larger than any single deer. Sit with that for a moment. This is the behavior researchers once struggled to explain. A deer disappears. Years pass. Then it reappears near an area it knew when young. Scientists documenting long-term deer movement have observed surprising returns to familiar childhood ranges. Not nearby. Not recently visited. Familiar. If you have ever seen a deer staring quietly into a yard without feeding or moving, there may be more happening than you realize. It may be recognizing, comparing, remembering. You would never know. That is the entire point. Because memory is invisible until behavior reveals it. And for a moment, the past and present occupy the same patch of ground. Most people think memory is about geography, coordinates, distances, routes, but places carry feelings. A quiet grove, a protected corner, a place where danger never arrived. Researchers studying animal cognition have found that animals often associate locations with experiences. The next time you see a deer hesitate before entering your yard, notice how carefully she moves. You may not have noticed. She noticed. The memory may not be about the place itself. It may be about how the place made survival feel. And that changes everything. This is the one that stays with me. You see a deer standing near a back porch, or looking toward a kitchen window, or waiting beside a garden nobody tends anymore. And nothing about it seems remarkable, until you realize the person who used to live there is gone. Researchers documenting long-term site fidelity have found that some animals continue revisiting familiar locations long after circumstances change. If you have ever wondered why a deer returns to a place where there is no obvious food or shelter, the answer may not be simple. Maybe she remembers the yard. Maybe she remembers the routine. Maybe she remembers the feeling of that place. In the small ways available to it. A deer cannot understand human grief. But it can recognize absence. It can recognize that something once present is no longer there. And still come back. That is not a story about deer. That is a story about human truth. Because every one of us has stood somewhere that used to contain someone we loved. And for a moment we stayed. Not because they were still there. Because part of us was. The deer at your window may not be waiting. But sometimes it feels that way. And perhaps that feeling exists for a reason. I would love to know, have you ever seen the same deer return to your yard after months or even years away? The stories this hidden backyard wildlife community shares are some of the most extraordinary I read every week, and every single one of them matters. If anything in this video changed the way you think about deer in your yard, share it with someone who would understand. Thank you for being here at Hidden Backyard Wildlife. Some paths remain long after the footsteps fade. Some places remain long after we leave them. I will see you in the next one.